From Eyewitness News, this is Newsmakers.
Are the United States and Russia on the cusp of another Cold War? Tensions in Ukraine and Syria have strained U.S.-Russian relations. Plus, the post-mortem on the enrollment period for the Affordable Care Act and the fight to extend benefits for the long-term unemployed. Our guest this week on Newsmakers, United States Senator Jack Reed. Welcome to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. Joining me on the program, WPRI.com reporter Ted Nesi. Senator, welcome back to the program.
Thanks, Tim.
It's really good to have you.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Let's start with Ukraine. I have a very basic question. You know, a lot of people watching this at home have an idea that there's a problem in Ukraine, but they're not really immersed in the details of it. And many may feel, look, we have enough problems at home, and they might question why we're getting involved. Why is what's happening over there important to us?
Well, first, the Russians violated international law blatantly by seizing the Crimea. They had a presence there, a legal presence, a military presence, basing rights, etc. But they seized that territory in contravention of treaties they had signed very recently, within several decades, and then they annexed it to Russia. And now they're agitating within the Ukraine, which is an independent country, particularly East Ukraine on their border, to create turmoil, and there's the possibility at least that they could take a extraordinarily blatant act to sort of try to seize part of East Ukraine, which goes to the independence.
Is that an invasion in your eyes? If they were to cross the border of Ukraine?
If they were to cross that border, that would be a clear-cut invasion.
And should U.S. take military action?
Well, what we should do, and what we are doing, is take action already. We have imposed sanctions on the Russians, key oligarchs that are in Russia that have direct ties to Putin. We are assembling not only our colleagues in Europe but across the globe to take further sanctions if necessary, using economic pressure. And then we've started mobilizing NATO, not in any type of preemptive action, but just to send the signal that the NATO alliance is going to be strong. Now, the Ukraine is not part of NATO, but it is a country of great interest. We can't allow, independent countries to be subsumed by any other power in the world, and particularly Russia, who should be playing a more responsible role.
On the one hand, you say we can't allow it, but of course, Russia's interest in its next door neighbor is always going to be greater than the United States' interest in a faraway country, even with the effects on Europe and everything. I mean, on some level, if Putin wants to seize eastern Ukraine, in the end, isn't he probably going to be able to do that because he's the strongest power in that region?
Operationally, he has significant forces right along the border. In fact, they've announced they're doing tactical maneuvers, which is, I think, a signal he's trying to send us that he has the military might. But that should, in fact, I hope, encourage our allies, particularly the Germans, to stand with us in terms of very strict sanctions. An action like that has to be met. I think the most effective means to do that is tough economic sanctions, to signal to the Russians that they cannot do this without severe penalties. And frankly, I think in the long run, when you have a system which is based upon democracy and markets, you will eventually overwhelm Putinism, which is sort of a kleptocracy with oligarchs and with a poor economy to begin with. But we have to pull together, and not just the United States, but the Europeans. This should not be seen as a United States problem. This is a problem for the European community and the international community at large.
What do you think, though, of there's been a lot of criticism of President Obama's handling of both this and the Syria situation, especially in the last 8 months or so. It sort of come down to the idea of him sort of dithering and being indecisive. And as someone, you are now one of the most senior voices in your party on foreign affairs. Have you had any disappointment in how the president himself or the administration has handled these two crises, or do you think they've done the best they could?
Well, if you take the Syrian crisis, there was an expectation, not just by the United States, but by practically every other nation in the world, that Assad would fall of his own weight. That
Bashar Assad, the
president of Syria, that he just could not hang on given the popular discontent, the significant Sunni population, and he is part of the Alawite Shia minority, that he was going to fall just as others had fallen before him. And what happened, I think, frankly, is that both the Russians and the Iranians decided they couldn't see that happen, and they started very actively supporting them. We've been trying to organize our support, and it's frankly been slow getting off the mark. But most recently, I think we're taking much more forceful steps through our allies in the regions, the Saudis, the Qataris, to provide support and organize the resistance there, and also to provide humanitarian assistance. It's a humanitarian crisis, of a huge crisis.
You said slow getting off the mark. Is that a criticism of the Obama administration's initial handling of this?
I think it's a criticism not just of the Obama administration, but the perception in the European community and worldwide that this was going to happen naturally. There's another point, too. I mean, one of the key issues here is that the president was ready to mount airstrikes because of the use of chemical weapons. And then at the last moment, and again, this is ironic because it was the Russians who helped play a role in this, the Assad regime said they would give up their chemical weapons. And we've been in the process over the last several months of actually taking out all their chemical weapons. This is one of the few examples where we have successfully been able to take from a antagonistic country their weapons of mass destruction in a rather orderly way. We still have a ways to go. They may have secreted some weapons, so we might not clean out their entire inventory of weapons. But that, I think, has been lost in the discussion of Syria about what the president has accomplished. We have literally taken away weapons of mass destruction that could be used not just against their own population, but their neighbors. But I think what we're seeing now is it's a firming up of our commitment through our allies in the region to supporting more actively those anti-Assad forces on the ground.
We might pivot back to this topic, but I want to shift gears to the Affordable Care Act.
Sure.
At a town hall meeting in the summer of 2009, you said, quote, "If you like the insurance you have, you can choose to keep it." We know now that ended up not being the case for many, many people. Do you regret saying that?
I think what we hoped and anticipated that the insurance products that would be available on exchange would be far superior, and I think they are. And then I think the president recognizing that not only individual members of Congress, but he himself had made that declaration, is that they made attempts and have made attempts to allow people to keep their insurance. And so we've tried, I think, to make sure that pledge that was made in good faith has some substance in this new exchange system.
But it seemed like a talking point from the Obama administration. Do you feel misled about that initially?
No, I think what the focal point was, first of all, a huge proportion of people already have insurance and would not be affected and are not affected by Obamacare, Affordable Care. If you have insurance through a company, typically you're keeping the same insurance. I think that generalized comment about, if you have your insurance through your company, you don't have to go on exchange. And I think what we found was there were individual policyholders who were buying it themselves who found very quickly when the exchanges went up that their rates were doubling, that in fact it wasn't the same price they were paying. That's one of the things I found almost immediately. And so we've worked with people to try to get them help from the exchange. In many cases, they found products that are as good or even better at lower prices or at least comparable prices. But I think going back, one of the nuances, and it should have been much more emphasized, is that particularly in this individual market, that there could be some issues in terms of maintaining the exact same policy for the exact same price.
And you don't feel that was communicated properly from the beginning?
No, I think basically it was a generalized point about the notion, the thrust, and again, in August of 2010, when we were doing this, we hadn't yet finalized the legislation.
August 2009.
No, August 29,
yeah.
in 2009. We had not finalized the legislation. We were still, as you know, we hadn't even brought it up through the final passage in the Senate, and then we had two iterations. We passed the bill, one bill in the fall, and we did the final version in January of 2010. So this was a work in progress, and the intention, and I think it was sincere intention, was to have a system in which you had better options, you had better options across the board. And hopefully that's the case.
You've made a lot of national headlines in recent months for your work on an extension of unemployment benefits, especially for the long-term unemployed. It took you nearly 4 months. Earlier in April, you did get a handful of Republicans to sign on and help you pass that bill. Now it looks like it's languishing in the House, at least from Providence. I'm not down in Washington. But have you been contacted by anyone in the House Republican leadership? Are you getting any indication? I realize it's the other party in charge there, but what's going to happen to your bill?
Well, there are several Republicans, Peter King of New York, several others who wrote to Speaker Boehner saying we should get a vote on this. And I'm confident if the Speaker brought it up for vote, it would pass. What we did in the Senate was one of the models of how people believe we should do legislation. It was bipartisan. I had 6 Republicans who supported me finally. I had great support initially from Senator Dean Heller of Nevada, a Republican. We created a program that was fiscally responsible. It was fully paid for. It would provide not only benefits to individuals, thousands in Rhode Island, 2 million across the country, but it also would help stimulate the economy. Every economist who's looked at unemployment insurance says there's a bigger bang for the buck, that you get more in terms of demand. And it's obvious that people who are getting these checks are using them immediately to go to the market, to go to the car repair shop, et cetera.
You've made that case many times, though, but it doesn't sound like it's convinced Speaker
Well, I
Boehner.
think what's happened is that, unfortunately, Speaker Boehner has chosen, I think, not to respond to the needs even of his own constituents. One of our colleagues who supported us was Senator Rob Portman of Ohio.
A Republican as
A
well.
Republican of Ohio, who is Speaker Boehner. They're in the same delegation. And Senator Portman, to his great credit, understood that this is, one, an issue of many families struggling because they're looking for work in a market where there's 3 applicants for every job, and 2, it's good for the economy, and it's fiscally responsible.
And you're still making the case for it. To Ted's question, the question is, what do you think? Is this going to happen? And we should point out the bill would expire at the end of May, right?
Yeah.
And we're days away from May.
We are days away from May, and that's one of the unfortunate things, that we wanted to move this bill quickly. When Senator Heller and I were talking about this bill, it was January, where we were doing a small retroactive reimbursement, but a perspective through May, which would give us time to work on even a longer perspective. A lot of what happened in the Senate, even though we did get bipartisan support, the Senate Republican leadership drugged this out and drugged this out and drugged this out. So now Speaker Boehner has the sort of the luxury of saying, well, its time is running out if they'd given it to me sooner. I think it's so critical, and again, there are very few instances where you have this kind of bipartisan effort on an issue that affects individual Americans across the country and does it in a positive way, that I think that's another reason why the Speaker should embrace it and get it done.
Senator, we have to go to a break, but let's take a moment and step away from policy if we could. I want to bring up a picture of you with Boston Marathon winner Meb Keflezighi.
Yes.
It looks like you're in some sort of a road race with Meb there. Did you blow the doors off him?
He was jogging and he beat me by several hours. I coached him. I told him I think he had potential, and I was encouraging him to try for the marathon.
You are the key to Meb's success, is what you're saying.
Absolutely the key to. He was a lovely gentleman. He's a graduate of UCLA. He's just very nice, and it was nice to meet him. Little did I know that within 2 years, I think this was
2012, I think, wasn't it?
Within 2 years, he'd be winning the Boston Marathon. And it was such a great day in Boston. Boston's strong, coming back from a horrific incident, and then having for the first time since '83 an American win the race. That says a lot about our
Particularly when you
resilience.
coached.
And particularly when I coached, yes. I'll take credit for that.
All right, we're going to take a break. Our guest this week is U.S. Senator Jack Reed. Stay with us. You're watching Newsmakers. Welcome back to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. To my right, WPRI.com reporter Ted Nesi. Our guest this week is U.S. Senator Jack Reed. Senator, you're up for re-election in the fall. Yeah. Republican Ray McKay of Warwick says he's going to run against you. He's a Warwick City employee, and according to an ordinance there, employees cannot seek the nomination for any elected office. If he does, that's grounds for termination. Does that seem fair to you?
Well, the issue is before the courts, and I think it's inappropriate.
You're a lawyer. What do you think?
As a lawyer, I think it's a pending legal matter, and the best course of action is to let the courts decide. I have very confidence in the court. They're making legal arguments. They're making factual arguments. The courts will make a decision.
So you don't want to say whether or not you think
I don't think it's appropriate.
Jack Reed
No, I don't think it's appropriate to comment on pending legal actions. Not only this action, but a host of other actions. That's not my role. I'm a legislator, not a. I respect the courts, and I think the court should be allowed to make this decision free of any kind of editorial comment by me or anyone else.
How did you handle it? Right, you were in the private sector
I was
when
in
you
the
ran
private
for
sector.
U.S.
I
representative.
gave up my job at Edwards and Angel January of 1990, and I spent the whole year running for the United States Congress, 2nd District. And I thought, and this is personal, I thought one is that you can't really do 2 jobs at once of this magnitude. And second, I also didn't want to have it sort of perceived that I was being subsidized in my race by a private enterprise. I wanted to go out and campaign, and then if I got elected, I would, serve. If I didn't, then I would ask, see if I get my job back, basically.
Speaking of your re-election bid, when do you have plans to have a kickoff? When are you going to gear up? I mean, the New York Times gave you a 99% chance once again this week of winning, so it's not looking like a barn burner.
No, it's every race is competitive, and this is a situation now, particularly with campaign funding laws in the Supreme Court, Citizens United, where these races quickly can be nationalized, quickly can be infused with huge amounts of money. I'm going to run hard. The best way, I think, is to keep doing my job as best I can, to try to help people here in Rhode Island, and also talk about what more we have to do to stimulate jobs, stimulate growth, to give people a fair shot, great opportunity to have them feel confident that the next generation is going to do as well as better. That's the sense my parents had, and that's the sense we have to restore.
You won the seat. It was formerly held by the late Claiborne Pell. I did the math. If you kept the seat as long as he did, you wouldn't retire until 2032, when you will be 83 years old. Could you imagine serving that long?
I think you ask the people of Rhode Island for the opportunity to serve for 6 years. That's the term of a senator, and you try to spend every one of those moments doing the best you can for the people of Rhode Island. And then it's their judgment ultimately of how long you serve based upon what you do and how you do it. And I just take every day as it comes in terms of trying to do my best. And so I'm not looking 25, 30 years. I'm looking at what we can do today and in the next several days to improve the condition of Rhode Islanders and also our position in the world.
If the Democrats hold on to the Senate, you are next in line to take over as chairman of the Armed Services Committee. Politico ran a report this week that stated your campaign received $34,000 in contributions from defense contractor Lockheed Martin's PAC and individual employees there just last quarter, including $2,000 from the CEO. I have a perception question for you, Senator. For a lot of people, they think that's pay to play.
No, and it's not. My approach to these issue, not just defense issues, but all the issues, is what's in the best interest of the people of Rhode Island, and substantively, what's the best policy. One of the things, reputations I think of accumulating in Washington, is someone who pays close attention to substance, to policy, to the long run, what's going to be the effect, regardless of its impact on me, but more importantly, what's going to be the impact on the country and particularly my constituents in Rhode Island. One of the things we recognize, particularly in Rhode Island, is we have a huge defense sector. And a lot of our best jobs are defense jobs. So I've been trying to, be supportive not only defense because of our national security, but also because it translates into jobs here in Rhode Island. And that's something I think that's important to keep doing.
As chair of Armed Services Committee in that context, do you think that would help Rhode Island?
Well, I'm in a situation where I take nothing for granted. I have to get reelected. We have to hold the Senate in terms of majority Democrats. I think we will, but I think you can't assume that. And when those two things come to pass, then I'll have to make a decision between, the Armed Services Committee, but I'm also second ranking on banking.
Sure.
But I'm not even going to think about that until.
Do you have one you like better than the other?
Actually, I'm very fortunate because the policy issues in both are challenging. In terms of my own experience, spending time at West Point and commanding paratroopers, et cetera, I've got a great sort of personal affection for the military. But I'm going to defer any type of judgment until we have to get through this election cycle and see where we are.
You consistently get one of the highest approval ratings in Rhode Island, and you're kind of an elder statesman of the Democratic Party here at this point. No offense intended with the word elder there. But in that context, I'm wondering, what was your reaction to those stunning raids House Speaker former House Speaker Gordon Fox's home and office. I mean, it felt like it was a body blow to public confidence in a lot of ways. But what did you think from down in Washington?
Well, it was a surprise, a shock, to be honest. And I think also, too, with the decision by the Speaker to resign within a day signals that this is a very, very serious situation. We have to wait until the law enforcement authorities make it clear what they're going to do. There's been no charges preferred. There's been even no sort of indication of what the premise was for the warrant to go in and seize documents and other material. But it's very serious and very shocking. And anytime you have a situation where the proprietary of actions of a public official, in any case, it's disturbing. Ironically, that very same day, I was approached on the floor by Senator Hagan. One of her mayors, I think the mayor of Charlotte, was also arrested. He was, in fact, arrested. The charges were preferred. So this is not something that is unique to Rhode Island, but in any place, any time when there's a suggestion of criminal activity involving public officials, that's a serious, serious blow to public confidence.
To me, that you were approached about it. Here in our bubble, that was a huge story. Did the ripple effects reach down to Washington, D.C.? Did other colleagues ask you about it?
They did, but it was interesting because, in the context of this other mayor in, I believe it was Charlotte, North Carolina,
that's correct, yes.
So that it was like, wow, it was not a Rhode Island phenomenon exclusively. It was a situation where these things happen, unfortunately, and that does shake people's confidence, and that's not more than unfortunate. It's not, we want to be able to give people confidence that we're making decisions based upon their best interest and without any regard to self-interest.
We have a new poll from Gallup out just yesterday showing just 18% of Rhode Islanders think the state is the best or one of the best to live in, the lowest percentage in the country. It just seems so abysmal, such a sad result for that. I mean, do you think that's the economy? Do you think people just are getting glum and around? What do you make of it? You've been on the scene a long time
I
here.
think it's the economy, and I think it's the duration of this recession. We have been through periods of time where we've seen 10% unemployment. In 1982, we were up above 10%, et cetera, but it snapped back pretty quickly. The nature of this recession, the long-term nature of it, and in fact, too, of the impact on long-term unemployed, and I think there's also a correlation with age of middle-aged people who in previous recessions were somewhat protected because it was a different economy. It was a more industrial sector where if you were on the first shift, then the younger people would be laid off, but you'd be fine even through the worst of times. That's because of technology, because of the dynamic nature of business today, the global nature of business today. No one seems to be immune from some of these effects. And I think that is really sort of eating at the confidence. But, we're trying to build in place today sort of opportunities to grow. For example, the airport now, with a significant federal contribution, is not only making safety improvements. By 2017, it'll be capable of international travel. And if we can get a carrier in here, and we've now an international airport, we're now connected with the global economy much better. We've put a significant amount of money into Quonset Point, about $25 million over the last 5-6 years. That's now one of the major car importation ports in the country. There are areas here that show growth and show promise. The challenge at every level is to make sure we sort of connect literally the dots so that we can go out and make a sales pitch legitimately that this is a great place to live. One thing I think most Rhode Islanders, if you ask about the quality of life, et cetera, they would say this is one of the best places to live.
Senator, I'd be remiss if I didn't bring this up. 2 weeks ago, Rhode Island lost Nuala Pell, the wife of the late Senator Claiborne Pell. You took over for Senator Pell when he retired in 1996. What was your relationship with her?
Well, first of all, I succeeded Senator Pell. No one could take over for Senator Pell. He was just wonderful and did so much for the country. She was his partner in so many ways, and his success was her success. She was one of the most gracious and lovely women I've ever met. The first time I met her. She came to a function with Senator Pell. I was running for the state senate in Cranston. My mother was alive then. She sat next to my mother. She couldn't have been more friendly. They were chatting away, and that just could have grace, that style, no airs whatsoever. And then I'm always touched because in the the last 10 years or so, they'd be honoring her appropriately because she was one of the most distinguished citizens of this state we've ever had. And I'd show up, and her first response was, "What are you doing here? Why are you coming?" And I'd have to say, "What do you mean? Anyone in the state who deserves praise and and legitimately say you're it. Oh no, please. It was never about herself. It was always dismissive of all this stuff. A lovely, lovely lady, and we've lost someone who added grace and style and dignity at it, and we always need that.
I think everyone listening will echo that. U.S. Senator Jack Reed, thank you so much for joining us on the program. If you missed any of it, it's online, WPRI.com. For Ted Nesi, I'm Tim White. We'll see you next week on Newsmakers.